Columbus didn't discover anything. He just got lucky. His geography was so wrong that if an unknown continent hadn't blocked his path, his entire crew would have died at sea. He calculated the westward distance to Asia at roughly 3,700 nautical miles. The actual distance, accounting for the Americas in the way, is closer to 12,000. His critics, the scholars who rejected his proposal, were right. They correctly predicted the ocean was far too wide for his provisions to survive. Geography rescued him, not genius. This is history. And the real story of maritime discovery is far older, far wider, and far more impressive than one man's fortunate mistake. Here is the version most of us learned. Columbus was a visionary who believed the Earth was round when everyone else thought it was flat. He sailed west, proved the doubters wrong, and discovered the New World. Every part of that story has a problem. Educated Europeans in 1492 had known the Earth was spherical for nearly 2,000 years. They inherited that knowledge from the Greeks. Eratosthenes calculated Earth's circumference in roughly 240 BCE, using the shadow angles cast at two different cities, a method of genuine scientific precision. His result, depending on which ancient unit of measurement you use to interpret his figures, ranged from approximately 39,000 to 46,000 kilometers. The method was brilliant. The Earth's actual equatorial circumference is 40,075 kilometers. The Spanish court didn't reject Columbus because they feared falling off the edge. They rejected him because their astronomers calculated the ocean crossing would take far longer than his ships could carry food and water. They were right. Columbus was wrong. His critical error was geographic, not purely mathematical. Partly by misreading the 9th century Arab astronomer al-Farghani, conflating the shorter Arabic mile with the longer Roman mile, and partly by placing Asia far closer to Europe than it actually was. The result was a westward distance to Asia roughly half of what the ocean actually demanded. One unit. One misreading. A journey he believed would take weeks that would actually have taken months, and killed everyone aboard. So if Columbus's story is built on a miscalculation, what were the actual foundations of maritime exploration? In 1088 CE, a Chinese scholar named Shen Kuo recorded something precise and practical in a book called The Dream Pool Essays. He described how diviners would rub a needle against a lodestone, then float it on water or suspend it on a thread. The needle, he wrote, would always point south, with a slight deviation he called magnetic declination. That deviation, the fact that he noticed it, measured it, and recorded it, that is not someone who stumbled onto a curiosity. That is a scientist working with systematic precision. Around 1190 CE, an English scholar named Alexander Neckham provided one of the earliest European written descriptions of a magnetized needle used by sailors in his work De Naturis Rerum, On the Nature of Things. He presented it as a known tool, not a novelty, not a recent invention, a thing sailors already used. The technology had arrived. The question is how it crossed that 100-year gap. The most plausible path runs through Arab maritime traders in the Indian Ocean, who were using the compass by the 12th century, and whose texts circulated into Mediterranean scholarship. The exact transmission route remains incompletely documented. It is a well-supported inference based on trade patterns and the timing of written records, not a proven chain of custody. Europe didn't invent the compass. It inherited it. From China, via the Arab world, through a century of maritime commerce that history rarely names. And what did that inheritance actually change? It changed what darkness meant. Before the compass, open ocean sailing after dark was genuinely dangerous in ways that are hard to overstate. Ships hugged coastlines. They waited for clear skies. They anchored when they couldn't see stars. After the compass, the ocean became navigable in a fundamentally different way. The routes opened up. The distances became possible. A single needle, floating in a bowl of water, changed the geometry of the world.
It didn't do so instantly. It took generations of sailors, traders, and scholars to carry that knowledge westward. But the moment Shen Kuo wrote down the declination, the clock started. But a compass tells you which direction you're pointing. It doesn't tell you whether your ship can survive the journey. Around 1000 CE, Norse voyagers reached the coast of North America. We know this not from sagas alone, but from the ground. Los Olmedos in Newfoundland is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and the only confirmed Norse settlement site in North America. Excavations have uncovered iron nails, Norse-style pottery, and a bronze ring-headed pin of Scandinavian origin. The settlement dates to approximately 1000 CE, roughly 500 years before Columbus's first voyage in 1492. What made this possible was the longship itself. The clinker-built hull, overlapping planks fastened with iron rivets, gave Viking vessels exceptional flexibility in rough Atlantic seas, allowing them to flex without fracturing under wave stress. This construction was particularly well suited to North Atlantic conditions, though Mediterranean vessels were optimized for their own different waters and operational needs. When ocean swells hit a clinker hull, the planks flex slightly and absorb the energy. The hull moves with the wave rather than against it. A rigid hull resists and eventually fractures. The same wave that a longship rides becomes a structural threat to a vessel that cannot bend. The result was a ship that, when lightly loaded, could achieve a draft, the depth below the waterline, of as little as 50 centimeters. Larger ocean-going longships typically ran deeper, but even these remained significantly shallower than contemporary Mediterranean vessels. At their shallowest, these ships could operate in water barely deeper than a standard bathtub. This meant Norse ships could cross the North Atlantic and then sail directly up rivers, navigating terrain that no deep-keeled vessel could follow. They weren't just open ocean vessels. They were ships capable of both deep water and shallow river. A dual capability that gave Norse explorers access to interior landscapes no other maritime culture could reach in the North Atlantic. And yet, the Norse settlements in North America didn't last. The sagas mention conflict with local populations. Supply lines stretched impossibly thin across the Atlantic. No permanent colonies survived. The technology existed. The numbers and the will didn't. Now consider a different ocean entirely. The Pacific is the largest body of water on Earth. Crossing it without instruments, without charts, without anything we would recognize as navigation technology, that should be impossible. And yet, sweet potatoes are native to South America. By approximately 1200 CE, within a range of uncertainty, they appear in the Polynesian archaeological record, thousands of kilometers from their origin, on islands with no land connection to South America. For a long time, this was treated as a puzzle with no clean answer. Botanists noted it. Anthropologists debated it. Nobody could prove how the plant crossed the ocean. Then, in 2020, a study published in Current Biology analyzed ancient DNA from both Polynesian and South American indigenous populations. The genetic signal confirmed that contact occurred. Around 1200 CE, Polynesian navigators and South American populations mixed. The DNA makes that clear.
Whether the sweet potato was deliberately carried or arrived through other means remains a subject of ongoing research, but someone made the crossing. The plant didn't drift across the Pacific on its own. They navigated using stars, ocean swells, bird flight patterns, and cloud formations over land. No compass, no written charts. Oral knowledge passed between generations of navigators who memorized the ocean the way others memorize roads. They crossed the Pacific 300 years before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. So here is the question the evidence forces. The Polynesians reached South America around 1200 CE. The Norse established a settlement in North America around 1000 CE. The compass arrived in European hands by 1190 CE, inherited from Chinese scholarship a century earlier. And yet, none of those voyages rewrote the map. Columbus's did. Why? The answer isn't about the ships or the compass or the mathematics. It's about what happened after landing. Columbus sailed in 1492. Gutenberg's printing press had been operating for roughly 50 years. Gutenberg began printing around 1440 CE, and the Gutenberg Bible was completed in 1455. Within months of Columbus's return, his letters were printed and distributed across Europe, translated, reprinted, read by merchants, monarchs, and rivals simultaneously. The Norse reached Newfoundland and told their story in oral sagas. Those sagas circulated within a small community in the North Atlantic: Iceland, Greenland, the Norwegian coast. Remarkable stories, narrow reach. The Polynesians carried their knowledge in memory and practice, passed between navigators across generations. Precise, resilient, and entirely invisible to the literate world that would eventually write the history books. Columbus's voyage entered a world with printing, with competing Atlantic empires hungry for resources, and with the institutional infrastructure to act immediately on what he found. The technology that made 1492 decisive wasn't the compass. It was the printing press. The compass pointed the way. The ship survived the crossing, but print made it permanent. What this history actually documents is an inheritance. Every great voyage stood on techniques developed elsewhere by people who rarely received credit for them. The compass traveled from Shen Kuo's bowl of water in 1088 CE to Alexander Neckham's sailor's deck around 1190 CE. That 100-year gap most likely represents a chain of transmission through Arab traders, Indian Ocean ports, and Mediterranean scholars. A pathway that history has largely passed over in silence, even if its precise links remain incompletely documented. The Norse built ships that could cross oceans and navigate rivers simultaneously. That dual capability, deep water and shallow draft, was an engineering achievement optimized for the North Atlantic that no other maritime culture of the era matched in those conditions. And they used it to reach North America 5 centuries before the voyage that gets the credit. The Polynesians crossed the largest ocean on Earth using only memory, stars, and the feel of waves beneath a hull. The genetic proof of that crossing was published in 2020. It confirmed what the sweet potato had been suggesting for decades, that contact occurred and that the ocean was no barrier to navigators who had learned to read it. Columbus got the credit because his voyage happened at the right moment in European history, when print could carry the news, when empires were positioned to act on it, and when the institutional appetite for expansion was at its peak. He sailed into a world that was already primed to remember him. That isn't a reason to dismiss his voyage. It's a reason to understand it accurately, as one link in a chain that began in a Song Dynasty scholar's study, continued through an Arab trading port, crossed the North Atlantic 5 centuries early, and rounded the Pacific 300 years before anyone in Europe knew the Pacific was there. Discovery, it turns out, is rarely the work of one man, one voyage, or one moment. It is the accumulated inheritance of centuries of engineering, observation, and courage. Most of it unrecorded, much of it uncredited, and almost none of it originating where the history books say it did. We document how infrastructure actually works, by separating what people claim to have invented from what the archaeological record proves they inherited. In the comments, which technology shown here, the compass, the clinker-built hull, or celestial navigation, do you think deserves the credit Columbus got? The compass points north. History, it turns out, needs better calibration.